Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Monkey. GDC was last week, and Yinty invited me and a bunch of other content creators, so here let's do a quick recap of everything that I saw. Mainly on the topic of the feature of Yinty based on the roadmap talk. This involves dots, multiplayer, rendering, new UGS tools, several new samples, and a bunch more. Then Yinty also had some exclusive talks where we saw a bit more detail on a bunch of tools, like for example the recently unveiled Yinty AI. A lot of it is behind NDA, but still there are some details that I can share. There was also a general Q&A at GDC where tons of people asked all kinds of interesting questions. And we had a meetup where lots of people showed up, which was really great. This was my very first GDC, so this was an awesome, very busy week. Here I'm going to try to cover everything in this quick recap video, so let's do it. And like I said, Yinty flew me over there, so this video is sponsored by Yinty. Okay, so starting off with the thing that most people are interested in, which was the roadmap talk. I believe they will be publishing this one and some more talks on their YouTube channel in the coming days. The roadmap covered quite a lot of things. A bunch of those are already out in version 22.2. A bunch more are coming out or getting some upgrades with the 22 LTS, which should be coming out in the next few months. And finally, we got a bunch of previews on what's coming up in 23.1 and beyond. This talk actually started in a very important way by reiterating what they've already said several times before, which is how they're always looking for feedback. Every tool they build, there's always a way to get in contact with the team. You can post on Discord, forums, or Reddit. Personally, I know that recently as I was researching game server hosting and matchmaker, I had a bunch of questions and feedback which I post on the forums. Then one thing they've been doing recently are the game focused blog posts where they talk about all kinds of things they've been doing, all related to game development. And they've also done a bunch of devlets. This is where one team from Yinty will be present for an entire day and you can ask them any questions you want. So if you have any issues or feedback with Yinty, definitely go ahead and tell them. That's the main way that the engine improves for everyone. The thing that most people want to hear about is on dots, which continues to be on track for hitting 1.0 production ready in the 22 LTS version, so that should be out before summer. The 1.0 version is actually already out in preview. I've made a pretty detailed tutorial on it, and the final 1.0 version should be very similar to that. Honestly, for this part, what stuck out to me the most was simply just how many examples already exist of games using dots. Even though it's not technically production ready, there are already many games using it, either currently in production or already out. The main example for this talk was Heroish. It's a nice action strategy game that doesn't really have hundreds of thousands of units, but still benefited from using dots. Another example is V-Rising, which used dots for world streaming. The recent game Ixion also had a huge scale with tons of systems. Detonation Racing was one that was showcased in a previous talk and uses dots for control and determinism. Then the game Hostile Mars uses it for massive simulation scale. And in multiplayer, the game Hysteria is using netcode for entities. Also very important is how all of these games are using a hybrid workflow, meaning they are combining entities and game objects instead of going 100% entities. That means that the workflows that you've already learned using game objects, they are still very much applicable when working with entities. Now, if you use Rider as your code editor, then it's also getting a huge upgrade to support the dots workflows. It helps you quickly create systems and inspect the generated source code. You can easily create bakers and authoring components, as well as generating some aspects. It also helps you find problems in your code, like for example some missing queries. So if you use Rider and you want to work with dots, this can really help you speed up development. Also on dots, you might have heard a while ago they acquired a really awesome dots character controller. That used to be a paid asset, but now it's free. Instead of being on the asset store, it is now on the package manager. Each package has its own verification process, but hopefully this one will also hit 1.0 verified alongside the dots 1.0. Also, one very important detail that I heard in one of the exclusive talks was their plans for dots in the future after 1.0. Obviously, they are working on building upon this 1.0 base. In the future, they will be adding things like a dots animation system. However, very importantly is how they made it very clear that the primary focus for dots is stability and bug fixes over adding new features. They really want this to be a very solid release that will help you build games that were simply not possible previously. So the focus is first on stability and only secondly on adding new features. Then the other really big area they've been working on this past year and they are continuing is multiplayer. As you might know, netcode for game objects is already production ready. I made a full free course on it a while ago. It's already a very capable, very robust toolset. Netcode for game objects is meant for small scale co-op games. So one excellent example that they showed is Shiva Falls. It's a perfect example of a small scale co-op game. Then for super fast competitive games, you have netcode for entities. I believe this one is also meant to hit 1.0 alongside the 22 LTS version. And one really awesome piece of news is how they have taken the awesome Megacity demo that they built for dots a long time ago, and they refactored it to make it work with dots 1.0, and also made it using netcode for entities. So this is a really awesome fully working sample with up to 64 players, and it should be coming soon. Related to multiplayer is the entire Unity Gaming Services suite of tools. They already have tons of them. I've already covered quite a lot of them. For example, in my free multiplayer course, I use Netcode for game objects. Then I use Lobby to create a lobby and Relay to handle the connections. Later on, I also made dedicated tutorials for using Matchmaker and game server hosting. And of course, all of those tools require authentication. And I've also covered cloud content delivery in my Ultimate Unity Overview course. Coming soon are also a bunch more interesting tools. There's Unity Friends to help you easily manage a friend list, Unity Leaderboards to help you track player scores, and something really exciting, which is user-generated content. I actually got to see a bunch more details on this one tool in an exclusive talk in their offices. I'm not allowed to share any details, but I can say that what I saw looks really awesome. I generally think this will be an excellent addition to this entire UGS toolstack. Nowadays, user-generated content is a really big thing. Players really enjoy it, and having a way to add it much more easily to your game is an excellent thing. And of course, they also highlighted how all of these tools are engine agnostic, meaning that you could use any of these in a game made with Unreal or Godot. Like for example, Apex Legends is not made with the Unity game engine, but it does use Unity's game server hosting. Then for a bunch more UGS announcements, Cloud Code is getting C# support instead of just JavaScript. It is also getting some triggers and events so you can run logic periodically instead of just when called upon by a player. Cloud Save is getting support for binary data instead of just JSON. This way you can store anything you want. Remote config is also being expanded to support both JSON and basic strings. You can also add rules to prevent incorrect data. So in all, there's a bunch of new tools and plenty of improvements to already existing ones. Something obviously very important to a successful game are graphics. This portion actually started with a really nice statistic. Nowadays, most games are already using one of the two scriptable render pipelines, either URP or AGRP. And something very important for visuals is simply performance. DirectX 12 is finally fully production ready. This one has been in preview for ages, so it's great to finally see it come out. This gives you a great performance boost pretty much across the board. With regards to lighting, adaptive probe volumes is the one big feature coming soon. Handling light probes is always a pain, so this is definitely a welcome addition. These are currently already available in AGRP, and they are coming to URP in 23.1. Basically, this helps you easily place light probes in your world. Another great addition is per pixel lighting on light probes. This helps you generate much more accurate lighting when using light probes, especially on very large objects. Another feature are lighting scenarios. This is how you can bake lights in various ways and then seamlessly swap between them. This makes building a day-night cycle really easy. Speaking of baking, the GPU Light Mapper is coming out of preview in 23.2. This is another one that had been in preview for a very long time, and they've also managed to lower the requirements from 4GB down to 2GB. Already in 22.2 is the excellent water system for AGRP. It already looks really gorgeous with the ability to simulate all kinds of bodies of water. For a bunch more rendering announcements, Forward Plus rendering in URP, which allows you to have tons and tons of lights. LD Crossfade, which makes for some really smooth transitions. You have decal layers, so you can place down some decals and not have it affect certain objects. Then temporal anti-aliasing, which can really help cut down on the kind of shimmer effect. The shader graph full screen master node is excellent for making custom post-processing effects. There's also something called custom render textures. Now this is actually unrelated to the usual render textures. Instead, this is about generating a texture using nothing but a shader. AGRP is getting some really awesome looking volumetric fog, and there's a whole bunch of samples that you can try out. Also, the shaders used in the enemies demo, they are available for you to download and inspect. I also saw a really impressive Ziva demo on the show floor. Basically, this is facial motion driven by machine learning, which means you can achieve it in a really tiny size. The guy at the booth mentioned how the original enemies demo required something like a gigabyte of data just for the facial performance, whereas with a Ziva puppet, they could get very close to the same level of quality with just 50 megabytes. It still costs quite a bit to create a Ziva puppet. The cost is apparently $1,800, but you can imagine how over time, as that cost comes down, soon enough every NPC in an indie game could have this level of quality for facial capture. Another tool that is also owned by Unity, but personally I've never used it, is SpeedTree. This one continues getting updates. It has existed for many years. I actually saw a really nice demo at the Yinty booth, and it looks really powerful and actually pretty simple to use. I need to do some research, but I might do a tutorial on this sometime in the future. Then splines, which are already available in 22, and they are being used more often, like in letting you create dynamic meshes to populate your worlds. You can also merge meshes, create multiple splits, and so on. And for URP, the one big update is actually the brand new sample scene. Now this is one sample scene, but really it's 3 in 1. You have an intro area where it showcases photorealistic visuals. Then there's a garden showcasing a more stylized look with tons of dynamic lights. And finally, there's a space game showcasing a hyper-stylized scene with some really nice custom lighting. I'm definitely looking forward to trying out this sample when it comes out. Then the VFX graph is also getting improvements. In 22 LTS, they are adding instancing support. This lets you spawn multiple instances of the exact same effect with very little CPU overhead. There are also some Boolean ports that let you enable or disable only certain parts of an effect. You can now write custom HLSL blocks. So if you have some logic where it's easier to just write the code instead of using nodes, and this can really help you. You can mix both nodes and code. And perhaps most impressive of all is 6-way lighting. This lets you bake lighting from multiple directions, all in the same flipbook on different channels. Then you can place that object, that effect, anywhere in the world, and it works perfectly in any lighting condition. The results look really awesome. Wherever the effect is placed, it always looks good. There's also a blog post diving into more detail on this one. And of course, another pillar of Unity is how it runs on everything. It supports basically every platform. So there are a bunch more improvements when it comes to mobile. Now, this is an area that I don't know much about, but new features do seem very useful, like for example managing the config files directly inside Unity. Desktop and console got some incremental builds. This feature was actually already super helpful to me when I was making my multiplayer course. In there, I had to make builds all the time, and thanks to this incremental builds feature, making each of those builds was super easy, really fast. Then you can soon deploy to Chrome OS, and there's ARM64 support coming to Windows. For the web, this is also getting a ton of improvements. Mobile browser support has been lacking for quite a while, but now they're really working on it. And something pretty amazing is WebGL multithreading. So soon enough, you will be able to run multi-threaded native C++ code on a WebGL build. That is really impressive. Another very important platform is XR, so that's VR and AR. It's also another topic that I'd love to cover whenever I can find the time. Again, they support pretty much every platform, including the recently released PlayStation VR 2 and MetaQuest Pro. For PSVR 2, they added support for foveated rendering. This one feature really helps on performance. Another performance feature is single-pass rendering. This really reduces CPU overhead when rendering both eyes, as well as haptics and audio. And again, lots of awesome games already out on PlayStation VR 2, all of them made with Unity. For input, the XR Interaction Toolkit continues getting updates. And something really impressive is the simulation package. This helps you test AR and VR directly in the editor without having to physically put on a headset. There are a bunch more interaction examples coming soon, as well as some project templates. So really, regardless of your target platform, Unity has a team working on it. Then for some smaller but still very important improvements, already in 22 is the bulk package management. With this, you can select and manage multiple packages at once, really useful. They also added support for the USC file format. This is apparently really widely used in many industries. Addressables now gives you a addressables build report. With this, you can identify how the asset bundles are being created. For code, they are updating .NET, migrating to Microsoft's core CLR, as well as continuing the improvements to enter play mode faster. They are also unifying their existing asynchronous codebase, making it use the regular C# async await keywords. You can already see this unification in action in all of the UGS tools, like the lobby and relay. They already use async await in similar ways. The input system continues getting updates. In the future, they are working on streamlining the getting started process. The memory profiler is now a verified package. UI Toolkit got a bunch more upgrades, including a really awesome sample that is already out, as well as some more search improvements, including searching through right-click menus, and a whole bunch more. So Unity truly is massive nowadays, so many areas, so many use cases. It's impossible to cover everything that every team is doing, but this roadmap really shows you the scale of the engine. There are so many things already out and so many still to come in every area. One very important thing that was absent from the roadmap but was actually announced literally on that very same day was Yinty AI. This is an extremely important topic, so I'm actually going to cover this in a separate dedicated video. I want to do that because I imagine tons of people are going to be looking for info specifically on Yinty AI, so I want to separate that from the general roadmap and GDC recap. But for now, I can say that the response has been pretty mixed, and most of it actually for a very good reason since it's extremely light on details. But I can also say that Unity had an exclusive session where they showed us the tools that they're working on and what are their goals and guiding principles with Yinty AI. And based on what I've seen, I would say that the team is very much on the right track. They are very focused on doing it ethically and correctly. It's all behind an NDA, so I can't say too much, but I'm going to cover that in a bit more detail in the next video. They also have a sign-up form I've linked in the description, so if you want, go ahead and sign up and stay tuned for the video later this week. One very interesting talk was right at the end. It was the Unity Q&A. Basically, about a dozen Unity people from all kinds of teams were there, ready to answer anything. All of the questions were extremely varied on all kinds of topics. I wrote them all down, so here's some quick highlights. One of the more important questions was with regards to Unity answers. If you've ever been there, then you know there's a really annoying bug where it replaces the word hi with anonymous, which makes so many answers nearly impossible to read. A while ago, Unity actually planned on doing something pretty dumb. They were going to close Unity answers and completely remove it from the internet. Obviously, the response from the community was very negative and very intense. Thankfully, Unity listened to that feedback and walked back on their plan, so Unity Answers still exists, but it does exist with that bug and a very old, very hard to use platform. Their answer to this is that instead of fixing just that one specific bug, they're actually working on upgrading the entire platform itself. So rather than just a band-aid, they are working on a proper Unity Answers platform. No details on any timeline, but hopefully soon. Related to feedback, someone asked, why does Unity have so many options? There is Discord, Reddit, forums, GitHub threads, and many more. The answer is that each platform serves a different purpose, and personally, I very much agree with that answer. Personally, I do not like Discord because I don't have the time for a real-time platform, so I can't really use it. I much prefer the asynchronous forum, but tons of people do love Discord. So in this case, I would definitely say more options is definitely better. Then someone asked about mixing local and online co-op with netcode for game objects. Meaning, for example, have a game where you have two local clients playing in the same session and two more online clients. Unity answered that right now it's not really made for that, but it is something they are actively working on. They're working on abstracting out the netcode layer, which would then enable you to create a dummy local client. Someone asked an interesting question on the Unity bug reports and what does won't fix mean. The answer is it can actually mean several things. It could be there's already a valid workaround, or it could be that this specific bug is solved using a different, better tool, or it could simply be that the number of users affected by it is a tiny number and fixing it would actually require a massive refactor of whatever system it involves, and based on that, it's simply not worth it to take developers from other projects to fix whatever that bug is. One interesting question was with regards to accessibility and what is Unity doing about that. Their answer is they are in the beginning stages of implementing accessibility options to the Unity editor itself so that everyone can make games. And for game accessibility, there is apparently a color blindness post-processing sample, which you can inspect in the shader graph samples. And if you want to learn more about this topic, then they also recommend the website gameaccessibilityguidelines.com. Then for a two-part question, are Unity themselves working on some kind of multiplayer, multi-platform game? The answer to the first part, is Unity making a game themselves? The answer is no. Some people always get annoyed at that answer, but honestly, I can see their point of view. Their answer is they already use the engine themselves through the various programs they have where they work closely with developers. This way they can improve the engine by having a team constantly go out and interact with dozens of unique projects, instead of having just a single in-house team building a single project. I definitely wish Gigai had continued, but I can also see their point of view. And the second part of that question is with regards to multi-platform. The answer is this is a tricky subject because pretty much everything related to platforms, like the console SDKs, all of that is behind strict NDAs, so they can't really share any specifics on it. But they did mention they're actively working on providing some kind of abstraction and some ways to help you pass certification. Then someone asked about upgrading a Unity version, and how it sucks to be stuck on an old version and doing an upgrade could be too high risk. So what to do about that, and which version to pick when starting a new project? The answer is, depending on your dev cycle, you should choose the version that won't be on LTS by the time you release. So for example, if you're launching a game in the next 6 months, go ahead and use version 22, which won't be in LTS by then. But if you're, for example, more than a year out, then perhaps use version 23. And with regards to upgrades, they mentioned that they've been working on simplifying that process, and I can definitely confirm that is the case. I remember back in the Unity 5 days that upgrading the Unity version really meant fixing tons and tons of bugs. Whereas nowadays, honestly, I don't remember the last time that I had issues upgrading. I can take a version from Unity 2019 and upgrade it to 22 and everything works fine. One thing that could cause issues are the graphics, since those have gone through some pretty significant changes over the past few years. The answer to that one is check the package website and look at the upgrade guides. Someone asked a question on what resources to help students learn. Unity pointed out that there are plenty of courses and tutorials on Unity Learn. They also have tons of resources on resources.unity.com. Their free ebooks are especially excellent. I've read a bunch of them and they do contain tons of awesome info. So that's Unity's answer. And of course my own answer in terms of learning material is I would suggest browse this channel or just YouTube in general. Then there was a high school teacher helping their kids make a Pong game using NGO and trying to deploy to WebGL, but it didn't work. The answer is that nope, right now WebGL does not work with Unity Transport. The version 1.0 doesn't work on the web because it has no WebSocket, whereas Transport 2.0 will support it. It is currently an experimental and it might be production ready in 22 LTS. So that's a bunch of questions. This Q&A section was pretty great, lots of interesting questions including things that I'd never thought to ask about. Then one thing that happened during GDC was actually the meetup. This was mainly organized by Matt from Game Dev Guide and Mark from Game Maker's Toolkit. I didn't really announce it myself because it was my very first GDC, so I had no idea if I was going to be busy watching some talks at that time. But I did end up going. I was there alongside a bunch of other awesome content creators and tons of people showed up. I must say that I am very much an introvert, so I was pretty stressed out about going to a meetup, but thankfully everyone was super nice. Even though I don't use the camera in my videos, there was still a bunch of people that recognized me and said hello. It was awesome to meet so many people working on so many interesting, unique projects. There was someone building a game like Animal Crossing and using my grid system tutorials to make the house furniture system. Someone was working on a game and needed to learn pathfinding and they used my video to learn the algorithm. A bunch of people said they were going through my turn-based strategy course. Then I also spoke to someone who was building an MMO, another one working on the Diablo-like. All in all, tons of awesome people working on lots of different projects and everyone was super nice. So thank you all to everyone who showed up. I hope you had fun meeting myself and all of the other content creators. If you don't know any of these, then go ahead and subscribe to them. The meetup did go really well, so hopefully next year let's do this again. Beyond that, since this was my very first GDC, everything was so new to me. I very much enjoyed walking around the show floor, looking at all of the awesome things on display. There were lots of awesome motion capture suits, a bunch of server tools, some audio tools, lots of AR glasses, and tons more companies that I have no idea what they actually do just by looking at the booth. Also enjoyed watching the various booths for each country. As someone who loves management and simulation games, I definitely enjoyed the Germany booth. There was a section for the IGF Awards with tons of awesome indie games. Also some game publishers, which is where I found out the awesome game Dyson Sphere program is actually getting a really nice update soon. Then it was fun to see both the Unity and Unreal booths side by side. Both had some learning sessions to learn how to use the engine, a bunch of demos showcasing all kinds of tools, and of course showcases of lots of games built using the engines. Looking at those really tells you how the engines are just tools. It's all up to the developers to use the tools to make some awesome games. Unity had Ship of Fools, Undisputed, and a bunch of mobile and tablet games. Then Unreal had Like a Dragon Ishin, Blue Protocol, and Hi-Fi Rush. So both of them really showcase how the engines can be used to build any awesome game you can think of. Although I would say Unreal actually had the better booth for one simple reason: they had free cookies and I love cookies. So my suggestion to Unity is definitely add some cookies to the booth next year. Okay, so that's my recap of GDC 23. Tons of awesome stuff. This was a really busy week. As always, the future looks bright. Lots of great tools and updates already out and more coming in the future. Stay tuned for tutorials on a bunch of these new tools, like for example Unity Friends and Leaderboards. And stay tuned for the video covering Yinty AI coming later this week. Thank you to everyone who came to the meetup and said hello. Thank you to Unity for flying me over for my very first GDC. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.